Hi, I'm Joan, Director of Education at the Westmoreland, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about hair in art. Have you ever spent time at an art museum or any number of art museums enjoying their portraiture collection? And as you're looking at these people in art, wondering what it is that has influenced some of the hairstyles and hair fashions that you see in these? What has been happening over the expanse of time that might have influenced people to do these things with their hair? We're going to start by looking at a portrait in the museum's collection. It's a portrait of Helen Gallagher. Now, this painting was a portrait that was painted by Malcolm Parcell in 1928. Take a moment to look at Helen, and in particular, of course, her hair, because that's what we're going to be talking about. So you'll notice that Helen's hair is cut into a rather sleek, fun, modern for the time bob, and the manner in which she's posing has allowed the artist to show that haircut off to us very nicely. You might also know that 1928 was the year prior to the beginning of the Great Depression. And this made me wonder, was this haircut in any way influenced by the economics and the social upheaval of the time? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But let me tell you a little bit more about that period of time. The 1920s, also known as the Roaring Twenties, was a time when women's hair changed dramatically. It went from long to extremely short, almost as short as a man's in many cases. This was because women were beginning to look for the same opportunities as men and wanted to have access to the same kinds of activities. So it was also a time when the movies became something that people were beginning to pay more attention to, and it was the first time we had kind of the rise in celebrity culture. So the movie stars that women were looking up to were people like Clara Bow, who sported the bob that we were looking at in the portrait of Helen Gallagher, and for men it was Rudolph Valentino. By the time the Great Depression hit, things began to change. People still looked to movie stars for the influences in their fashion and their hairstyle. Hair for women began to grow longer, a little bit more romantic again, a little softer, looking for some form of idealism and softness to negate the negativity of the Great Depression. For men, it was all about control. Men had haircuts that were well polished, they went to the barbers more frequently, their hair was often held in place with pomade. It was really important to them that their hair sent out the message that everything was okay. People in the 1930s also looked to Hollywood and growing celebrity for influence. For men, it was someone like Clark Gable, and for women, it was someone like Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow was an artist who not only had longer hair and curlier hair, but she was somebody who had bleached hair, and blonde bleached hair became something that was very, very fashionable during the Depression. Unfortunately, many people used bleaches for their hair that were not safe or healthy to use, such as really strong ammonia. So what's the connection between hairstyles during the time of the Great Depression and hairstyles now during COVID-19? Well, one of the things that I'm noticing is that people are still very interested in celebrity trends. And while many of us are spending time at home, we're looking to celebrities for interesting ideas. One of the things that's become really popular for both women and men is hair dye. Now, if you think back to Jean Harlow and the bleach blonde using ammonia, it kind of makes sense that we're playing with color again. It seems like a pretty safe thing to do. It's interesting that the colors that women are selecting, and men, are non-natural colors. Pink is definitely a big trend. There's also blue. Green has been pretty big. I dyed my hair green well ahead of that trend a couple of years ago. And also just a variety of rainbow colors throughout the hair. Another thing that is becoming maybe not popular so much as out of necessity is having quarantine haircuts where you trust a loved one to take the scissors and chop your locks for you, hopefully in nothing that's too dramatic. I think the color trend might stick around. I'm not so sure that the home haircuts will. Let's take a look at a couple of other artworks. This time we're going to focus on some of the men in the museum's collection. What do you notice about the men in these portraits? Well, a number of them have slightly longer hair, and you might also notice that it looks like their hair is either grey or white. You might further notice that they could possibly be wearing wigs. When these were painted, they were reflecting a fashion of the time in the 1700s and late 1700s, where men frequently wore powdered wigs. Actually, women often did too. In fact, if you look at the portraits in many museum collections and you look at portraits from the 1700s, you'll probably notice that the white hair, grey hair, and wigs was a very big trend and a pretty big fashion statement. However, here's where the change came in. In 1795, a tax for hair powder was put in place. This was actually to help fund the Napoleonic Wars. It was wildly unpopular. People did not like having money collected from them for a fashion statement, and that prompted a pretty big change in hair fashion at the time. Men and women threw their powdered wigs away, and for men in particular, they went to short haircuts, and that remained the trend for men for, you know, many years after that, for at least a good 200 years. So while short hair remained pretty much a trend for men for a long time after that, around the time that hippie culture developed, you would see men sporting much longer hair, kind of an interesting reverse trend from what you saw during the Roaring Twenties, where women cut their hair and it became really short to look like men's. Now you had men growing their hair longer, women also had long hair. And this was kind of a way to rebel against society, to rebel against what their parents had stood for, and it was a statement against the Vietnam War also. I hope that you enjoyed this brief look at hair in art and fashion with me, and the next time you're at an art museum you see the portraits in a whole new light. In the meantime, if you're still trying to decide what color to dye your hair during quarantine, if you can't decide whether you want pink or yellow or blue or green or purple, I say just go with the whole rainbow. It's only hair dye. It's not going to last forever. Until next time, stay safe and stay well.